Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Woo Ae Yi. Welcome to the show. Looking forward to having a chat with you today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, cool. So today we're gonna be talking about addiction, and so I was just wondering, could you give us a little bit of background on yourself and your story and or what you feel led to the addiction?
Sure. So first, I want to just give a brief introduction of myself.
Great.
So I'm Woo Ae Yi. I was adopted when I was 4 months old from South Korea. I was born in Songnam Hospital. I grew up in a family that was from West Virginia. And that's the basics for adoption.
Yeah.
What led me to addiction was, as I know a lot of people who are adopted also feel, when your first family, when you feel that you've been rejected by your first family, it really is hard. And then you have a hard time believing in the love of your second family, even through no fault of their own. And so it brings a lot of shame, and shame leads to addiction.
Yeah. How do you see that shame? Is it numb? I think the word I've heard used is numbing. So the addiction, the substance is there to numb or somehow to make that shame go away. But that's just my kind of third person view of it. Is that right? Or how would you see that?
Well, my particular addiction is behavioral. It's love addiction, okay. Which also is related to codependency. But in terms of what you're saying, it is kind of like masking. So basically, like, we always want to feel better than we do. But sometimes by seeking to feel better, sometimes we're just masking not feeling good. And so we're pretending to feel better by just ignoring what other else is making us feel bad. So basically, through love addiction, I basically sought after partners that made me feel special, that made me feel accepted and loved. But the thing is, I never actually felt like they could love me because my first set of parents didn't. I didn't feel that they did.
So it's a release. It's a release. It's a relief. You're looking for a relief from the shame, yeah. But it's like a short term. It's a short term release that has no longevity to it because the underlying wound hasn't been addressed.
Yes.
Yeah. And when did you cotton on to this addiction? When did you become kind of aware of it?
I became aware of it. Well, I was aware of it earlier, but I never actually did anything about it. It was only in 2016 that I decided to do something about it.
Okay.
So,
was there a particular moment that led to that? Was a particular incident or event that led to that?
Right. So there was. I was with someone who I'd been with before. So it was one of those relationships of, getting back together and then breaking up and getting back together again. So it's not the healthiest relationship. And even during that relationship, I was still flirting with other guys, and I realized that I had a problem when I started realizing that I didn't even remember their names.
Oh, wow.
So that's when I decided that I needed to get some help.
Yeah. So where did you look for that help?
Through our 12-step program, Sex and Love with Addicts Anonymous. And so, and it was a good experience too. I mean, don't get me wrong. There were good things that came out of it. I still have a friend that I met. Of course, I'm not going to say names.
No.
Through that experience, and we're still friends.
Yeah. So what was it that shifted for you through the 12 step? That's a big question.
It was really hard. Actually, I think the hardest part was actually reading about love addiction. I was just reading the book and I just kept crying because everything that was being written in that book was so so on par and so direct. And I really felt like someone understood me to a very deep level. One thing about 12-step programs is that basically you're supposed to take a break from your addiction for 90 days. So what was really hard, and it also my ex felt offended by it, my sponsor basically told me that in order to be sober from my addiction, I had to break up with my boyfriend. And so he thought that that wasn't the solution because he thought that it was better for me to stay with him, and because he thought that the problem was me being with all these other people
Right.
outside of the relationship. But the problem was also being with him because it was an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah. So did you have the 90-day break then? Did you?
Not initially. Basically, I told my sponsor that I was still going to stay with him. And that was my choice. And she accepted it, and we still tried to work around that.
So we
did eventually break up.
Yeah, you did eventually. So what was it that you learned from the? Well, first off, there's a, you're reading the book about love addiction. You're crying. You're thinking this kind of explains everything. There's a release.
Mm-hmm.
There's a normalization of it. It
Mm-hmm.
sounds like, this explains everything, and there's a relief at feeling that this isn't just you. This has happened to other people. That's mm-hmm. kind of normalization right. Is. So I'm thinking about my own experiences reading The Primal Wound. Mm-hmm. Similar kind of thing. I think this I've got a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. There's a relief in getting a diagnosis, but that diagnosis can be, so for me, became a bit of a label. Actually, after the release, things got a bit trickier for me because I felt I was stuck with that label. I didn't see a way out of it, really. So what was it? What happened after that for you, Yi?
Well, actually, I feel that I need to go backwards instead of going forwards right now.
Go for it.
So part of there were several things that led me towards having a love addiction. One was first feeling shame from not being wanted by my first set of parents. Second was I also had the parents that I did grow up with. My father was very authoritative, and that was difficult for me to deal with. being that we aren't genetically related, I had a hard time with his style, and we are very different. We have a hard time sometimes coming up with things to talk about. So that was awkward because I felt like it was an odd fit for me. And then also some things, since you're talking about a diagnosis, some things that also led to it was I had ADHD and bipolar, both of which have been related to promiscuity. Not always, but sometimes. And so part of that is because having, for example, like having ADHD, it causes people who grow up to be like raised as girls or whatever, they basically have traits that seem more masculine, and so it doesn't really fit. And so there's always, again, an odd fit, not just in my family, but I was feeling like I had an odd fit with the world around me. And with bipolar, that also has to do with moods going up and going down, and like, and so sometimes when I was feeling like really happy or having hypomania, then I also would act out.
Yeah, tricky.
So that's why I thought that I needed to go backwards first.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And then after that, I would have to say one thing that's tough about recovering from love addiction is that, just as with other addictions, you kind of like, once you get over an addiction, you kind of don't want to have anything to do with it, even though it might be behavioral and it might be something that you still should participate in. So there's a term. So people who are sex addicts, once they clean up, then they become what is called a sexual anorexic, which basically means like you don't want to have sex anymore. It's kind of like people when they quit smoking, then all of a sudden like they don't want to be around smoke.
Yeah.
No, they don't want to be around cigarettes.
Yeah. But you can survive. People can survive without cigarettes in their life, but it's trickier to survive without a partner for some people.
Right.
So
right. So what basically ended up happening was that since I still wanted to be in a relationship, but I didn't want to have sex, I basically attracted people who were older and were not able to, basically. So for a time being, I'm not like that anymore, but that's basically what happened initially afterwards.
Yeah. So can you take me back a step to what you learned through the insight moments? Obviously, it's a huge insight moment reading the book and the relief with the diagnosis of the love addiction. Mm-hmm. What other insights did you have along the 12-step process?
So the insights that I had were, I learned a lot about myself. Like everything that I was reading, I was like, yes, I relate with that. I really felt like they were like the author was getting inside my head. I really related to also all the things about codependency because, like I said, it's very well connected to love addiction. And I've struggled with codependency all my life, even to this day. because it doesn't just affect romantic relationships, but it also affects all relationships. So I learned that what worked for me when I was a kid didn't work for me as an adult. So, for example, people learn codependency from, say, like maybe a fear of not wanting to anger someone, or feeling like you have to take care of someone else's emotions. And what I learned is that I don't have to do that anymore. I'm an adult, and I have to be able to set boundaries. And no one ever taught me anything about boundaries when I was young. I learned boundaries when I was like 25,
Wow.
which is not that long ago.
Yeah. So can you explain a little bit more what you mean by codependency in your case?
So a lot of people have different definitions for codependency. Codependency to me means like, it's similar to love addiction, actually. It's that you're very focused on someone else. You want someone else's approval. You want, you will do anything to get that, even if you don't feel comfortable with it. So like sometimes even in my, like when I volunteer for things, I'll overextend, or I'll take on more than I can. Sometimes it also relates to giving unsolicited advice. So thinking that you know better than other people. The history of the word codependency, it actually started off when people were addicted to alcohol. And so they basically called the person who was in a partnership with the alcoholic a codependent. And that's where it started from. But people are starting to find that this is true for basically anyone who is in a partnership with any addict. And it's also true for anyone who is an addict. So basically addicts find other addicts.
Okay. So the whole thing is that both of those people are seeking something else from the other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it takes a codependent relationship means both of you are codependent. One's depends on.
Not necessarily. Sometimes it's more obvious. Sometimes the addiction is a bigger problem than the codependency, even though codependency is kind of like connected to love addiction itself. So if the addiction is stronger, then of course you would say that person's an addict and the other person's a codependent. But if both people are not addicts, then you would say that maybe they are both codependent. Like in my relationship, I feel that we're both codependent, but we work around it. We learn how to manage ourselves, and if we see each other doing something like that, then we just kind of point it out.
Yeah. So the only things that I've really read about addiction was actually a drug addiction. So it was a story of a guy who was an adrenaline junkie, who then became a junkie because he decided to take heroin for 2 weeks to see what it was like coming off it. And he didn't, obviously it's a pretty nutso thing to do. 5 years later, he came off heroin, and it was the epiphany moment in like a 8 or 11 hour book. Is what he gives it one sentence, right? So all he says is that in that sentence is, I realized that I was bigger than my addiction.
Mhm.
And that's it. He doesn't go into any more details than that. What did your turnaround from love addiction look like?
Well, I actually kind of want to talk a little bit about the example you brought up.
Okay, sure.
So I actually have an ex who also was a heroin addict, and he died January of this year. So he's kind of been on my mind a bit.
Yeah.
We had a lot in common. We both had ADHD. We both were creatives. I actually put together the eulogy, and I talked about all the different things that we have in common. I'm not going to go into all of that because there was a lot. But basically, he lost the war against addiction, and that's why he died.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually going to write a book. I'm going to write his letters up in a book. And I'm going to give them to his mother.
Wow.
So I guess connecting my addiction with his addiction, like he did, even though he was addicted to a substance, he also was possibly addicted to me. I don't know. But basically, yeah, like he the things that excited him were just like love. And there's a song about heroin that basically compares heroin to a woman.
Wow.
And also the weird thing about sex is that it's said to be as powerful as like cocaine. So there are some parallels between sex and drugs. You always hear like sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
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 So I guess one of the things I got out of my recovery was that, I mean, I don't know if I said in so many words that I was stronger than my addiction, but I basically just decided, that I didn't want to be that way anymore. One thing about addiction is that you start identifying with it. You start thinking that that's you and that's all that there is to you. So when I decided that I didn't want to identify myself with that label anymore, then I was able to move forward with my life and have a much richer life and do a lot of other things that I wouldn't have done when I was addicted.
The way I read that story, or it was actually listening to it on Audible, the way I heard it was, and I've listened to other people talking about addiction, is that it's a spiritual thing rather than a psychological thing. So it's about the guy, he's called Ben Timberlake. He realized he was bigger than his addiction, as in the essence of him, a higher power, him, like a not the little ego bit. He's not saying I'm bigger than my addiction. No, it's more, it's like a higher power thing. It's more of a tapping into a spiritual power that's underneath our that's bigger than our psychology.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've heard, that 12 steps programs are more spiritual in their essence than they are, psychological. So that's just what I've heard from the outside. So could you give us a little bit more of a flavor of that? Because I'm just setting out a very short.
So the 12-step programs, and this is also something that it's criticized for, is very religious. People tend to come to it, especially if they identify as Christian, for example, or any other faith. People who do not have a faith have a harder time with the idea of a higher power. There was a story once about someone who made a tree a higher power, and then all of a sudden the tree was attacked by lightning. So that wasn't a really good example of a higher power. One of in multiple steps, it talks about your higher power and giving yourself up to your higher power and surrendering. And that is a very important part of the program. And I myself am also religious. Some people would also say I'm pretty spiritual as well. And actually, it wasn't during this time, but more recently, I have actually converted to Islam. So from Christianity. So I'm still very religious and spiritual.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm into something called non-duality, which is at the essence of all religions, and it's about us as consciousness or awareness. So it's not a God thing; it's a consciousness thing. As in, we are the consciousness. We identify with the content of our minds rather than the background to that, the experiencer, the background to the content. So it's about, instead of focusing on the content, it's about focusing on us as the context, if that makes any sense.
And so the way I'm trying to understand this is there's a really good book out there that I read called The Untethered Soul.
Yeah.
And he talks about that it's kind of like, it's like our eyes are like a movie screen. Like we see all these different things through our movie screen, through our eyes. And since we're watching it so much and it's constant all the time, 24/7, we identify ourselves with what we're watching. But that's not really us. That's just the movie screen. That's just the things that we see is not who we are.
Yes. Yeah. Mickey Singer, isn't it? Yeah, Michael Singer. Yeah, I've listened.
Michael Singer.
I've listened to a couple of those. Yeah. So yeah, that's the sort of stuff that I'm into. That and Don Miguel Ruiz and Rupert Spire and people like that. So it's about consciousness or awareness. So we say like I am traumatized, or I am in love, or I am happy, or I am sad. It's the I amness. We're focusing on our beingness rather than what's going on for us, who we are. So I talk about these days, I'm more interested in who we are, who I am, than how I feel, because we're all identified in with our, as adoptees, a lot of us were, and me too, right? I was identified in with my trauma. So it's putting, it's making a gap. It's seeing a gap between who we are and how we feel.
Yeah, I would say that when I was in my addiction, I really thought that I really identified with my feelings, and the way that I felt was that I felt unloved. I felt that no one could love me. And so I kept trying to find ways to prove that I was unlovable, or I would try to find ways to feel love, but yet I could never feel love because I didn't think that it was something that was for me.
Yeah.
But then after my addiction, then I did realize that I was lovable, and I didn't feel as rejected. I was able to like parent myself, I guess.
Yeah. So is love addiction looking for love on the outside, because on the inside we don't feel lovable?
I guess it's kind of like, I would put it as kind of like seeking out bad boys in a way, the bad boy complex or whatever, of like thinking that, oh, this person's going to be the answer to my prayers, but in reality, bad boys are bad.
Yeah.
So they're not really someone that you should hang your head on, or put all your eggs in one basket for.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm trying to get to I'm trying to dig into the moments when things have changed for you. How would you describe those?
Well, I guess another thing that was pretty important to mention is that before I when I started realizing that I had a problem, but I wasn't ready quite yet to enroll in a 12-step program, I actually had a pregnancy scare. I wasn't actually pregnant, but I thought that I was.
Yeah.
Because I had some unprotected sex one day. And like, I think probably the stress kind of scared away my period symptoms or whatever.
So what are the questions I want to draw on as much of your learnings and your knowledge and the experiences that you've had, and I'm not quite sure what are the questions to ask. So what are the questions that I'm not asking you?
That's a good question. Maybe we could talk about my birth mother a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So
what would you like to share?
Sure. So to tie it in with shame, though, when I first reached out to my birth mother, she sent, like, I wrote 3 letters and she sent back 1. And that was the only letter I've ever had. In the letter, she actually says that she would like to write to me. However, when I shared it with my dad, he was so negative that all he saw was that she didn't want to write to me. And so instead of rereading the letter, I listened to my dad. And so for years, for like a decade, I thought that my birth mother wanted nothing to do with me, when in reality she did. So that was an interesting example of how what we believe can be so different from reality, that we end up making it reality. Because I mean, like, my birth mother was not going to wait around 10 years for me to have an epiphany that she still wanted to contact me.
So what happened next? What did you do next?
Well, I tried to see if I could find her again, but then she basically moved and didn't keep up her address with the adoption agency. So I wasn't able to find out anything more. The interesting thing, though, was that 10 years after the fact, I was talking with my adoption agency, and they finally decided to share some pertinent information, which would have been useful when I first searched for her, which was that she was pregnant at the time that I was searching for her the first time. So, and they told me that basically, even though my birth mom had come clean and told everyone, my brothers and sisters and second husband, who I was, and that she had had me. Once she had my sister, my youngest sister, she decided to not tell her. So I thought that was interesting, that she would be the only person in the family not to know.
Yeah. Who knows why people do these things, right? We're trying to second guess.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if maybe the fact that I hadn't responded back to her maybe was the reason why she thought that she should just move on without me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a whole kind of a domino effect.
Yeah. So will you have another go at tracking your birth mom down, do you think, or will you leave it as it is?
I don't know right now. It's not really the most important thing in my life, but maybe down the road I might come back to it.
Yeah. So I guess that begs the question: what is the most important thing in your life for you?
Well, I'm married now, so my husband is the most important thing in my life. And also, I have a regular 9-to-5 job as well.
Yeah. So when did you get married?
In 2018. So actually, it was 2 years after my recovery.
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, the weird thing is, in 2016, I was with that guy who I was with, who was a back and forth relationship. And then I broke up with him. But then I got back together with him in the beginning of 2018, thinking I could have another go to see if it would work. It didn't. So I broke up with him. And then like a few months later, then I met my husband.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was different in terms of who you were in meeting him? What had changed?
What had changed was that I realized that I realized that I was lovable. I realized that I didn't need to seek out other people for sex or for my entertainment. I felt more comfortable in myself.
Yeah.
And all those traits were very appealing.
Yeah. So what do you put that change down to?
Well, I would put it down to the recovery. The fact that I was able to get past my feeling of shame, and that I was finally able to open myself up to real love.
Yeah. Yeah. So the 12-step program for you was the thing that shifted the shame.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you heard of something called it's a guy called Richard Dawkins, David Dawkins, Richard Dawkins. I can't remember the guy's name. He's got a scale of human consciousness. Have you heard of that?
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't think it's Richard Dawkins, though.
No, it's not. It's Hawkins, scale of consciousness. I'm just Googling it as well. Yeah, David R. Hawkins. There you are.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, David R.
I have one of his books, but I haven't read it yet. I've heard really good things about it.
Yeah, because this scale of consciousness goes from 0 to 1,000.
No, that's really big.
Yeah, and it's a logarithmic scale, so it's very, as I understand it, that means it's a very, very steep. I can't figure another way of doing it, another way of saying it, but it's logarithmic scale, 0 to 1,000. So it's more like, I don't know, 0 to a billion. You know, it's a very steep cut. So small increments mean big differences. And scale 0 is dead, and the great religious avatars are 1,000. But shame is 0 is dead, and shame is 20. So it's a really toxic thing. It's a really toxic thing.
It really is.
So yeah, so shaking it off or seeing through it. Do you think shame is? I don't have an answer to this question myself, right? But do you think shame is a belief?
Yeah, I would say that shame is a belief. So the way that I identify a belief is that a belief is something that you're not entirely sure about, but you would fight other people to say that you're right and someone else is wrong. So like I would fight people to say that like that I was unlovable. Like I was so convinced of it at that time that I would like tell people, no, you don't understand it. Like no one could possibly love me.
Yeah.
And then I would just be stuck with that belief.
Yeah. So what do you think changes beliefs?
For one thing, you have to be open to it. You have to be willing to say, maybe I was wrong. And maybe someone else is right. You have to be at the right time in your life. And I think I was at the right time in my life.
So openness and timing. I was thinking about you telling the story about your adoptive father basically lying to you about the content of the letter from your birth mother. And
well,
that, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if he lied to me or maybe he just saw what he saw, because his beliefs were also so negative, and he had so very he was just negative about everything. And so when you're negative about everything, you can't see the positives. Like it's like you're literally blind to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was looking through the world through a lens, a negative lens, really.
Yeah.
And so he saw the negative in the letter and accentuated that.
Yeah.
But then at some point did you see did he keep the letter and then you saw it? And how did you realize
the reason why the letter came back out again was because I had a friend who had contact with translators, and she said, hey, let me translate your letter that you got from your birth mom. So I gave it to her, and then when they translated it back, then I read it and it looked like a completely different letter.
Yeah. So that's, to me, sounds like a belief change. You know, like the world. You talk about having to be open to changing your beliefs, and you talk about the timing has to be right as well. I think what that kind of realization that you had the belief shifted because you saw the truth. You were presented with the truth, and you could see that, you know, the new version, the truth of that letter was that she wanted contact rather than the false thing, the falsehood from your father, or the adoptive father, because of the way he saw it, his lens. It's a different lens. So it's seeing the truth that busts the belief.
True.
So was there a moment when your belief was busted, that you can remember, that the belief that you were unlovable, a belief that that you were unlovable, was busted, was you saw the truth of your lovability at some point? Do you remember that
I mean, to be honest, it wasn't like one moment where all of a sudden, like, the heavens opened and then I could see the light. It was really more like, and this is true for a lot of people. 12 steps, it's work. It's a lot of work. You have to do a lot of inner work. You have to work on yourself. You have to be willing to put in the work. And it's through putting in the work that you get these realizations. And it's a lot slower. It's a slower realization.
Yeah.
But you have to put in the work.
Do the work, yeah. It's an incremental.
Yeah.
You think anyway to that? Yeah, I'd agree with that. My own experience, I would say that matches as well. That it's been a series of steps, and when I describe those steps to other people, they don't seem to make much sense, you know, because it's just something you go. And yet there is one moment that really sticks out, and it's kind of spooky. I'm getting a bit goosebumpy, because it was a letter from my birth mum, when I saw the truth of how much she loved me. Yeah. So I'm wondering, did the reading of the letter, of your letter from your birth mum, what impact did that have on you?
Well, so that was in 2010. My pregnancy scare was 2012, and my recovery was in 2016.
Yeah.
So you can tell from that that instead of feeling loved from the letter because of my adoptive dad's influence, I felt shame from the letter.
Yeah.
And so that just kind of spiraled me downward.
So when did the translator tell you the truth about the letter? What the letter said?
That was 2020.
Right. Okay. So it wasn't a big step. You'd done your belief had been busted before then, because you married your husband in 2018 in recovery. Right. Yeah. So it was less significant for you than it was for me and my stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us? Are we done?
Well, as a screenwriter, I always like to put in a bit of myself in my screenplays.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I address adoption in my screenplays. I have a lot of other identities that I also address, but like I'll have characters that are adopted. In particularly in Red Thread of Fate, that's kind of a story based on my own life where the main character is adopted. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to link to that in the show notes. We're going to link to your website in the show notes. And it's great to see you sharing this stuff to change people's views, really. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So thanks, listeners. Thank you, and we'll speak to you all very soon. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, thank you.